Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to follow such great talks. So what I'm going to talk about specifically here is, in contrast to Dr. Orkin's talk, long-acting ART data in those specifically with adherence challenges. I want to drill a little bit more on risk factors for failures and the practical implications, and that was work that Chloe had done. I want to discuss pharmacokinetics of long-acting Cabril and what we know about it. And then we do have to mention adverse effects and maybe look beyond cabotegravir and rilpivirine as options for long-acting treatment. So why do we even want long-acting? Actually, the UNAIDS statistics were just released this morning, and it is, though there are many places where viral suppression rates are high on TLD, which is our first-line therapy worldwide, they're not exactly as high as we want. And I didn't get the UNAIDS statistics in here from this morning, but we're basically at the same sort of level of those who are living with HIV, the 71% virologic suppression rate. We wanted that to be 86. And in the US, actually, we even have poorer outcomes than the rest of the world. We have a very fractured healthcare system, and only 66% of those living with HIV are virologically suppressed per the CDC. So there's a reason to think that even though we have great oral medications, it's not always easy to take a medication every day, and we need some new options. And why long-acting? Well, in other fields, actually long-acting has been used in the context of adherence challenges. In the field of contraception, we used to have only a daily oral pill for contraception. When implants came out, when injectables every 3 months came out, when rings came out, actually the rate of unwanted pregnancies, especially in young women, went down. In the field of psychiatry care, long-acting antipsychotics can be very useful for people where it's hard to take that pill every day in the setting of a psychiatric disorder. And substance use treatment, we're really looking to Sublocade and other long-acting medications to combat treatment of alcohol and other substance use disorders. So long-acting can be really helpful in other fields for helping you with that barriers, which are so prevalent. Stigma is one of them, stockouts, transportation, forgetting, hard to take, side effects, multiple reasons why it's hard to take a pill every day. And then the final reason that we really need to increase our virologic suppression rates is these morning statistics, 39.9, that's without Russia data, so probably 40 million people living with HIV, 1.3 million new infections last year, 630,000 deaths. We're not where we want to be. What fuels the ongoing HIV epidemic is even middling rates of virologic suppression. We want high rates of virologic suppression, and not being suppressed will also lead to forward transmission. So lots of reasons why we need to get our virologic suppression rates up, and long-acting is one way to get there. So Dr. Orkin already went over the data, and I'm certainly not going to repeat that the original clinical trials to lead to the approval of cabotegravir and rilpivirine, which were specifically FLAIR, ATLAS, and ATLAS 2M, all required that the participants in these trials either were naive in FLAIR and they had to be put on oral medication, get virologically suppressed, and then switch over to the every 4 weeks in FLAIR long-acting cabotegravir and rilpivirine. In ATLAS and ATLAS 2M, they were treatment-experienced individuals doing fine, virologically suppressed on whatever they were taking, and then got switched over to long-acting. So these were virologically suppressed individuals, and that's how the studies were done, and that's how the initial approval of long-acting cabotegravir and rilpivirine was enacted in those on oral ART virologically suppressed. That was not just in this setting, meaning Europe and US, but the SOLAR study came out after approval, and as Dr. Orkin already summarized, the CARES trial really looked at this in low and middle income settings, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, still all virologically suppressed. Most of them were on TLD, 90.6%, and then switched over to the long-acting every 8 weeks Cabril. So what about the data in those who are adherence challenged? Well, there's not a strict trial yet in those who were viremic. So I have to say that's not the design of 5359, but I want to tell you about the design of 5359 to explain what this was trying to look at. This is a study in the ACTG that the question of the day was, what if you have adherence challenges, but we still do whatever it takes to get you suppressed on oral therapy? And then what's the result if you randomize to switching over to long-acting Cabril versus staying on that oral ART? So that was the design of 5359. It was not to look at it in viremic individuals, right? Like this was actually designed before the drugs came out. So there was a step one where oral ART was administered with conditional economic incentives to try to get everyone suppressed before you switch over to long-acting. And that was the design of the study, and it was every 4 weeks for the long-acting. Now, this 5359 study is not yet published, but the results were shown at CROI 2024, and we do have some updates on this. But what happened is that when this study actually got stopped, just like Purpose 1 did, because the DSMB met on February 12, 2024, they thought the results looked very favorable for long-acting, and they stopped the study. Now, when they stopped the study, we have some statistics of the 5359 participants. Number one, we know that there was at least diversity in racial and ethnic minorities. There was, by definition, everyone was adherence challenged. We got some data later that 80% were on government-funded insurance, and there was about 10% homeless rate. Now, even though everyone was supposed to be suppressed before they switched over, 17% still were viremic when they switched over, because this is a patient population by definition that's hard to suppress. And then the results that led to the DSMB stopping the study showed really favorable outcomes for those on long-acting ART with adherence challenges. Virologic failure was lower on long-acting ART, so was treatment-related failure. The primary outcome actually wasn't, which is a combination of those, but in general, the DSMB ruled that, well, the virologic failure rate is 7.2% on long-acting, 25.4% on oral, and that's enough to really say that that outcome should drive the decision to stop the trial. So 5359 came out still in abstract form. Then a bunch of groups around the world have, of course, been looking at long-acting ART in adherence-challenged patients, because we were all waiting for these drugs in the hopes that we could use it in our patients where it's hard to take oral ART. So we started at Ward 86 a demonstration project when long-acting cabotegravir and rilpivirine came out in 2021. We are well aware of the inclusion criteria of the trials that we've been discussing, that you have to be suppressed on oral ART before you start long-acting, but we put in our own inclusion criterion that said you don't have to be suppressed. You can be viremic, but please come into the clinic. Tell me that you're going to come into the clinic, because we didn't go out really and find people. So please come into the clinic for your injections, and we'll let you have these injections. And that was the expressing willingness. And we have put out our data in several formats. One, in July last year in Annals of Internal Medicine, we put out the results of the first 133 people with HIV who were enrolled in our demonstration project. 76 had started suppressed, like the clinical trials, but 57 or 43% started on long-acting cabotegravir and rilpivirine with viremia. You are not surprised to see that there are challenges to taking ART. Actually, a full 66% were unstably housed. If anyone's been to San Francisco lately, we really do have a homelessness problem. About a third endorse substance use. And in those with virologic suppression, almost everyone stayed suppressed. They actually all did stay suppressed. But for those who are viremic, 2 out of those 57 failed, and we projected that 98, it's kind of the same confirmed virologic failure rate that Dr. Orkner just showed us in the trials. So it looked okay, it looked good. I'll tell you, qualitatively, people were delighted. Patients were saying to us, well, I've never been virologically suppressed before. I don't have to think about this. I don't have to carry if I'm homeless, carry my meds around in a backpack. This makes a difference to be able to come in for long acting, and they came in for their injections. And then at CROI in March, we did do some follow-up analysis to just look at those who were viremic, who had longer periods of time on long-acting ART. So we have about 300 people on Cabril in our clinic, but 59 had started with viremia, and we had 48-week outcome data on those 59. Again, 52% had homelessness, 61% stimulant use, and at 48 weeks, 93% stayed virologically suppressed. So does look like there's longevity to this finding, at least over 48 weeks. Dr. Jürgen had already mentioned to us the OPERA cohort when he was talking about cabotegravir PrEP, but I will say that the OPERA cohort also shows us that people have been using long-acting cabotegravir providers in those who are viremic. This is data presented at ID Week, October in Boston, and 176 in the database. The OPERA cohort represents about 14% of people living with HIV, and 176 individuals had been started by their providers on long-acting Cabril, even when they were viremic, and there was an 82% virologic suppression rate, less than 50, and 94% less than 200 in the OPERA cohort. This 50 versus 200 is an important issue, which we don't have time to go into, but maybe we can talk about in the panel. And then this teeny tiny study, this was from University of Mississippi, it was only 12 people, all viremic, tried to get on oral ART, could not, started long-acting ART, and all of them suppressed. So putting together the 5359 data, this University of Mississippi study, the data from Ward 86, the IAS USA guidelines, which is not the DHHS, which is not the NIH guidelines in the US, but the IAS USA guidelines, did in March 1st, 2024, endorse the use of long-acting Cabril in those with viremia. In fact, they said these are the patients who are going to be most sick and can really progress, and I want you to consider using it in those who are viremic. This is not universal guidelines. This is a particular guideline committee. So a couple of, just one more minute on some unanswered questions for long-acting ART. I do want to say that that Dr. Orkin had done the CID paper of the expanded multivariable model about what predicted failure, and she had gone over that data in the previous talk, but what predicted failure. And we have decided in our clinic to be really specific about what we call rilpivirine-associated mutations. And the reason is you may have had exposure to favrins in the past. You may have a minor mutation. So we've decided to only focus in on the rilpivirine-associated mutations that we think are clinically significant. And how do we define this? Well, the CARES data made us think, because there was a lot of archived DNA genotype data. Actually, interestingly, 12% of people had lots of archived rilpivirine resistance mutations. Which ones are significant, which ones are not? Even the paper didn't really tell us. So what we've decided to do is we are only going to restrict the mutations that we don't allow into our clinical care program to clinically significant mutations. How do we define clinically significant mutations? For rilpivirine, we've decided that anyone who failed in the ECHO and THRIVE trials with rilpivirine-associated mutations, those are the ones that matter. We also took all the rilpivirine-associated mutations from failures in FLAIR, ATLAS, and ATLAS-2M, and SOLAR, and we said, if you failed rilpivirine with one of these mutations, you're not going to be allowed into our into taking rilpivirine. And then we did the same thing with cabotegravir. We didn't just choose any mutation that causes INSTI resistance. We said any of the HPTN 083 breakthroughs, if you broke through with mutations, those are the mutations we think that matter the most because you broke through and you got a seroconversion. And so we limit the cabotegravir resistance mutations that we don't let in to those particular mutations. And we do have a protocol that's publicly available. You just put in Ward 86, getting to 0, and we have listed all the mutations that we don't let in. The higher BMI, we've decided to just go for longer needles. I will say that This is not necessarily proven. This was a British Journal of Pharmacology paper that showed that if you get a longer needle in, if you have a BMI of greater than 30, that you get better spread into the intramuscular space. So we've just decided to use a longer needle in our program. To be fair, 20% of those in CARES had a BMI of greater than 20%, and they didn't use greater than 30, and they didn't use a longer needle. So I don't know if it's necessary, but we do it. As Chloe already said, subtype A1, no longer a concern, we're done. 51% of those in the CARES trial had A1. And then I'll just end with the pharmacokinetics. We are in a mystery phase of the pharmacokinetics of long-acting ART. This was a recent paper in the Lancet Regional Health that shows that in the Swiss HIV cohort study, PK levels were all over the place. It matters how you put it in. It matters if you put it in the space. It matters how you administer it. It matters if you have a high BMI. There's lots of factors that go into PK, and we don't know all those factors. This is a very tiny study, but 5 failures in Amsterdam had either low CAB levels, low rilpivirine levels, or both. So I do think that levels are going to matter, and I think that thinking about levels, though that's going to be hard to incorporate, may be important in this particular field. We also have to remember that we've already gone over adverse effects, and we don't have time to get into lenacapavir, but I do think that the nodules are going to be an issue with lenacapavir. At least 20% of people had nodules in the Capella study. So we are interested ultimately in thinking about new aspects like lenacapavir, cabotegravir, and we just had a trial approved in the ACTG, teeny tiny trial, 30 people, but we're going to be allowed to study lenacapavir and cabotegravir in those with NNRTI resistance, viremia, and adherence challenges, and we're very excited about that. So I'll end there. Thank you so much.